Thanks everybody for joining us. My name is Brian Armentrout. I'm with the Food Leadership Group. I'm the CEO. And this is episode 3 in our series on the Food Safety Modernization Act. Last week we spoke with Dr. Robert Brackett over at the Illinois Institute of Technology around what they've been doing for the training piece around the Food Safety Modernization Act. And this week it's my distinct pleasure to be able to talk with Dr. Lawrence Goodridge. He is the Ian and Jane Monroe Chair in Food Safety at McGill University up in Montreal, Quebec. So, Lawrence, how are you doing today?
Great, thank you.
Good, good. Do you prefer Lawrence or Larry, by the way, or what would you like?
Larry is great.
Okay, awesome. So, you and I had the pleasure here to meet not too long ago at IFT, and you have a very, very strong background in food micro and the different things that you guys have been doing up at McGill. I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to get together and kind of talk about what it is that you're doing up at the university and how this all integrates in with food safety and emerging threats and how quality managers can use this information as they're putting together their food safety plan. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Awesome. Well, let's kind of start off a little bit tell us about McGill and what you're doing at the university up there.
So I am the Ian and Jane Monroe Chair in Food Safety at McGill in the Department of Food Science. And as part of that appointment, I direct the food safety and quality program here. And that program, the FSQP for short, consists of 3 pillars. Training the next generation of food scientists that can go work in the food industry, whether in food safety or food production or other aspects of food science. Conducting research that is of importance to the industry. And I think we'll talk more about that later in this call. And then also conducting outreach to the industry, and that is training programs to help personnel who work within the food industry make sure that they stay abreast of current trends and needs and technology.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I mean, so definitely everybody is in the process right now. So the Food Safety Modernization Act, if you're a large company, is taking effect very soon. There's been some changes relative to timing and such, but that doesn't stop companies from moving forward with this. So one of the pieces of advice that I'm definitely giving everybody is get out and get your training, become a preventive controls qualified individual. Then you're able to put together your food safety plan. And the huge part of that food safety plan then is your hazard analysis. And I think this dovetails really nicely with the work that you're doing out there. So around emerging threats, we've seen some really weird stuff here recently. Listeria in sunflower seeds. There was a big recall not too long ago with E. coli in flour. Lots of things that you wouldn't expect. Can you kind of elaborate on that, Doctor, and give us a little more information on how you see this?
Well, I think, food production is increasingly becoming globalized. You just talked about the Food Safety Modernization Act, and one of the reasons that was developed was because of this recognition that there's food is produced by many multinationals that have plants all over the world, and whether it's Canada or whether it's the U.S., the fact of the matter is that when we import our food, we don't screen or test or analyze most of that. Probably 2% of what's imported to the U.S. and Canada is really screened. And then it's even arguable whether that's useful from a food safety standpoint, because most of it's visual inspection to make sure, for example, that cartons are not opened or visibly damaged. At the borders, there's no real work done to determine the presence of pathogens, and it's certainly not in real time. So the idea with FSMA is to make sure that the food produced in these countries, many of which may not have the same robust food safety regulations as we find in the U.S. and Canada, would produce those foods destined for North America in a way that we produce them here. With respect to these, outbreaks of bacteria and foods that we typically would not associate with those bacteria, I think we're going to see more of that. Listeria is ubiquitous. It's found in the environment. It's found basically everywhere. So if there's not adequate control steps in the food processing facility, and that includes, within that from harvest all the way through to packaging, then obviously it's going to be contaminated. E. coli and flour, the same thing. I note that both flour and fresh fruits and vegetables. Fresh fruits and vegetables are typically consumed raw. Flour, I was going to say, is typically consumed raw. It's not. We make with things, but one thing that people do is consume raw cookie batter. So this is, the challenge here is to control these contaminants in foods that may not be cooked before consumption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of times quality managers will think, well, this ingredient, peanut butter or what have you, it has low water activity, therefore it's not much of a threat. But what we've been finding is you can still have those areas of margins around the edge where you have additional water activity. We've all seen, the case where you have a jar of jelly that's sitting out on the counter, low water activity, but you're still getting mold growing around the edges because there's still available water at the top.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there's foodborne pathogens that seem to be able to grow in foods with low water activity. The obvious example is salmonella. But E. coli also, E. coli is very related to salmonella. They're in the same bacterial family. They share, a lot of similar traits. And the outbreak in the flour with E. coli shows that under certain circumstances, these bacteria can survive there. The other thing I think we have to remember is that, not all bacterial strains within a given species are going to behave similar. There's some strains that are more resistant to heat, and there are some strains that will be more resistant to desiccation. So, and keeping in mind, again, that foods are being produced all over the world, the types of strains that we have in North America may not be the ones that we find elsewhere, which may be able to better, these circumstances. If, for example, we're in a climate that's more dry, then if there's foodborne pathogens that are there, they may have adapted to be able to survive better in drier environments than in. So I think these are all the things that we have to consider.
That's a really good point. I mean, especially too, as you're moving these different commodities all around the world, you may be going from a relatively dry environment to one that's a more, let's say you live in Houston and you have a much more humid, hot environment, and something that wasn't growing can now all of a sudden grow.
Absolutely. So now we're starting to talk about the supply chain, and it's important. Obviously, one of the things in terms of controlling emerging threats is to ensure that the supply chain is intact from a security standpoint, but also from a food safety standpoint.
Right. Well, the other important fact too, and this really dovetails very well in with the hazard piece of it, is if you're building out your food safety plan, you need to take the inherent risk of who you're selling that product to. So Dr. Brackett and I talked about this a little bit as well. If you're buying non-fat dry milk and you're using it in an infant formula, the bacteria that you're looking at, Coronabacter or things like this, are going to be much different than if you're looking at it for the general population as well.
Right. Absolutely.
Very interesting. So put yourself in the shoes of a quality manager. You've been through your PCQI training. You're ready to take your old HACCP plan and revise it into preventive controls, and you're starting to look at the supplier piece of it. Any words of advice for those guys?
Basically what I say is this. I think if you look at outbreaks that have happened, certainly from a regulatory standpoint and from what's on paper, all the oftentimes we find that everything's there. Mm-hmm. But really where it falls down is in the operation.
Yeah.
So by that I mean suppliers. You can have supplier verification programs, and it's all written down. Yes, we ensure that we will produce these ingredients to your specifications and so on, and the paperwork's all done. But if you have employees who and the employees are the ones who are actually producing the ingredients, and they aren't following those specifications, it doesn't matter that it's written down. I think that's where we begin to see these outbreaks. It's not that we don't have the tools. It's the same thing for testing methods. It's not that we don't have the tools or so forth, but we're not using them properly. Mm-hmm. We don't conduct trend analysis so that we don't see the trends over time. A given commodity or whatever we're producing might be, we might be seeing increased numbers of Listeria monocytosis in that product over time, for example. That if you just scan with the naked eye, you're never going to see that from thousands of data points. But if you use software, you might see that. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing with employees, making sure that they're trained properly, so that there's no break in how things are produced. That to me is really, those are the real important things that I see. Another thing is having even though there's various quality programs, and you've talked about a number of them, HACCP, being the obvious one. I think it's still important for companies to have a decision-making tree, even that encompasses those programs and are above that. So and to always revisit that. Oftentimes, there's situations where, for whatever reason, and again, as food is more globalized, I think we'll see more of this. But for whatever reason, one supplier may not be available or able to supply all of the given supplies, when they normally would. So maybe for this one batch, a different supplier was sourced. Mm-hmm. And then you see an issue. Understanding that, building that into the risk analysis, having backup suppliers that you've already vetted, so that if situations like that happen, you can take appropriate steps, or you know that this vendor is good. Mm-hmm. One example I'll give of this is unrelated, but I think proves the example is the U.S. Armed Forces. So when they have a theater of war, they already vetted. They have rations, but for fresh fruits and vegetables, that has to be sourced locally. So they would go to that area and work with food vendors and source that and make sure that the food's safe. Mm-hmm. The first Gulf War, that was the first time they really fought in that theater, so they didn't do that. They were not able to do that, and because of that, they sourced a number of foods from vendors whose food safety plans were not adequate, and a number of armed personnel were sick, and in some cases fell sick, and in some cases that could have compromised military operations. So if you put that into conventional food production, you can see how the same thing can happen.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And another thing that people are going to start looking at really closely now as well is brokers, right? So if you're buying your raw materials through brokers, you have to understand where they're actually buying from and approve those sources through the broker.
Right, and absolutely, and kind of dovetailing into that is now this whole increased concern over food adulteration. Mm-hmm. I feel like I think many people have read The Jungle, in 1926, which led to really the first food safety laws being enacted in the U.S. And I feel like we're almost going back 100 years. We're back to that same issue, and in many cases it's worse because at least back then, the adulteration was happening locally. Mm-hmm. Here it's happening all over the world, and yes, the main concern right now seems to be economic adulteration, but I don't see a difference between economic and food safety adulteration. If you think of the melamine situation in powdered milk, yes, that was done for economic purposes, but melamine is also toxic to humans, so that was a food safety issue. Mm. The horse meat scandal in Europe, they didn't know where the horse meat came from. If it came from veterinary sources, that is potentially a food safety issue because of veterinary drugs that might have been in that meat that are banned from human consumption. So the point about brokers is it cannot be understated, and vetting your brokers, understanding completely where they are getting their supplies, and constantly following up with them, because they often will change their suppliers. And so I think that's very important.
Oh, absolutely. And what people need to remember with this whole process as well, Larry, is that these are all open books now. So FDA is going to be coming into your facility, wanting to see your supplier approval program, determining how you're evaluating risk for these different raw materials. and you have to prove that you've done the due diligence relative to this. And if a new threat emerges, and they weren't going to want to know how you address that.
Right. Absolutely.
Very good point. So people need more information. I'm a quality manager. I'm feeling overwhelmed. Is there additional information? Can they reach out to your team through your agency? And how can people get a hold of you if they like to ask questions?
Yeah, so I'll just quickly go over the training that we do. We have 6 workshops that we offer annually. 2 are microbiology workshops for people who work in quality assurance, so they understand how to why testing procedures they're using, why they are done. Often people who work in quality assurance are not formally trained or have not been formally trained in food safety, so we try to bridge that gap. We also teach a FDA and GMA sponsored Better Process Control School. Mm-hmm. So this is for companies that produce retorted or canned foods and to understand the food safety hazards associated with that. Then we also teach workshops that relate to FSMA and making sure that your institution or company is ready for that as it applies to whatever it is that you're making, and quality programs. So HACCP, for example, and other quality programs. So we teach those annually. In addition to that, however, we do one-off workshops. So if a company had need for a specific topic, we can do that training. In terms of how to contact me, email is a great way, and the program through me, or phone, of which I know you, Brian, now have that information.
Okay, great, perfect. So fantastic conversation. So if I'm putting together a food safety program, this hazard analysis and the ingredient piece of it with the pathogen piece, huge chunk. If you get this piece right in your food safety plan, odds are you're 80% there.
Yeah. I just want to add, though, it's important because I think one thing where companies fall down is this is not a static situation, it's dynamic. So once those programs are installed, wonderful, 80% of the way there, but it's a continuous reassessment of that. Yeah. This is, and then if there's any issues, it seems like there's any issues, or there's any even a slight concern or slight movement away from what is the norm with respect to, it could be testing that you're doing or new suppliers. It's vitally important to reassess the whole system. I think if that's constantly done, then companies will go a long way towards protecting themselves from contamination and the downstream negative consequences of it.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect point. Excellent conversation, Dr. Goodridge. I appreciate your time. This has been a really good conversation. I think this has got a ton of good information, and I'm sure people will be reaching out and asking for information as well. This is Brian Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. My website address is on the closing for this video. And once again, Dr. Goodridge, thanks for your time.
Thank you.